Okay. Well, this is one of my techniques to remove stuck rings. I use shim stock. 3 to 7 thousandths. I think I got 7 thousandths here. Used to get it from my job, but you could also use your auto feeler gauge set. I have it there. You can see it on the bench. This is for getting partially stuck rings out mostly. You're not going to get the real stuck ones out this way. But it's a pretty easy way. You could use some heat. Not too much heat because it affects the spring tension on the rings. Just a little heat. Without the shim stock in there, of course. Then you put the shim stock in there and you wiggle it back and forth with some WD-40. It works pretty good.
Different thicknesses. And you just kind of seesaw it around. And if the ring's not too stuck, you'll get it out. But a lot of times, I say more than 50% of the times, you got to break them out and clean the grooves. But this one's coming out. The other two popped right off, but this one was just partially stuck. And this is the one cylinder that was dragging. And that's how I do it. WD-40. You can also heat it up first before you put the shim stock in there, or your feeler gauge, your automotive feeler gauge. Just another tip. So I put number 2 in already, just showing you how I put the pistons in. I line the pins, the dowel pins in each groove, centered with the gap of the ring, and there's one on the opposite side. You got to make sure the gaps just like that. Now when you put the piston in, the head of the piston goes to the intake side. The rounded high part of the dome always goes to the carburetor side. So then I just take a screwdriver, average size screwdriver. Now I hone the cylinders. I use the three stone hone I have. With a drill, half speed with some 2-stroke oil and some WD-40, spraying it as I'm honing it very quickly. Maybe 60 seconds on each cylinder if it's not too bad, just to break the glaze. And then I'll put pressure down on the piston. You got to make sure the gaps, you'll have the one gap in the middle here. The pin is right in the middle. You got to make sure they're centered. And the other one's on top here. There's the other two on the top right here. So before you start pushing anything down, just make sure you're lined up. So I put downward pressure with my hand. I'll come on the right side, I push in, push on the left side, push there, there's one. Now you want to make sure your slot here, the pin is in the middle before you try to do this. Come 90 degrees and push down, go to the opposite side, push down, go in the back, push down, and you're pushing down the whole time with your left hand. Same thing here. Sometimes you have to rotate it just a little bit and push it down if the pin got off location a little bit. But it should go very easy. Of course it's on camera, it never does, but that's the way it is. There it goes. The pin was just off just a little bit, so you just rock it a little bit and it'll pop down the rest of the way. Same thing. Pushing down the last one, 90 degrees to the pin. Opposite side I push in, come around the back, push in, and by the gap, push in. There you go, it's in. Now it's much easier doing this without the camera in the way. So I fumbled a little bit, but I've done so many of them. No ring compressor. I have a ring compressor, I don't use it. This is the easiest way. There is a slight chamfer. Not too much on the 9.5s, but a lot of the other motors is a very large chamfer on it to help guide the rings in. These are a little, oh, there is a chamfer there. You can't see it. Is that the chamfer or is that just discoloration? Yeah, there's not much of a chamfer on the 9.5s. But that's how I put the pistons in. The next thing I do is put the crank in.
Well, in this little clip, I set the crank in. And when I do set the crank in there, the first thing I do is, before I hook up the rods, you know the rods are hooked up here, I push the rods down to the bottom of the cylinders. Sometimes I put the cylinder head on with 2 bolts just so the pistons don't fall out. And I set the top and lower needle bearing hole in the bearing itself to the pilot pin that's in the back half of the block. So there's 2 holes on the opposite sides of each bearing. One's a small, one's a large. The large one goes into the pin towards the back of the block, top and the bottom. And what you can do sometimes too is just take a Sharpie and mark the casting where the location is. So when you put the bearings on there and you go right to left, you know approximately where the hole is, and you'll feel it fall down in place. It's a little tricky on these 9.5s to set those bearings right, but you just got to make sure the big hole goes down in the bottom and it's both bearings, top and bottom, are locked into the pins. And then you can go set your middle one. When I set the middle bearings, I actually put 14 bearings in on the top in the picture there. On the video, I'll put 14 one at a time from the top to the one pops out where my finger is on the bottom there. And then I'll put 16 on the top of it with a little lithium grease to hold it in place. And then after cleaning the mating surfaces, putting the sealant on there, I'll set the block cabs on there. And that's pretty much how it's done.
Butter and to this lithium grease. Again, not a lot, just enough to hold the bearings. And then I'll seal the whole surface. In this case, I'm going to use the Permatex. It's Permatex 8062. You can buy it at any automotive place.
Now I use the Permatex sealant on this block cab. You also could use the 518 Loctite, which I use sometimes too. I like the gel seal better. It's a lot cleaner, easier, and less sloppy. The Permatex is pretty sloppy, but that's what the factory used years ago. Very similar to the Permatex of today. And they were pretty sloppy too in spots. In this clip, I got the sealant on there on both halves, and I set my bearings in the middle. Like I said, I put 14 in, one at a time on the block side until one pops out on the opposite side. Then I put the 16 on the top with a little grease, and then I double check everything and make sure my tabs are bent over on my rods. They should be, because I torqued the rods to 8 foot-pounds. I did replace one tab because it broke in the vise when I was taking the rings off. I didn't realize that it was in the way of the vise. There, just a quick glance at the opposite side. I'm getting ready to set the block half. I just want to make sure I keep making sure those bearings are pretty much in line with each other. And make sure the sealant's on there good. Again, you don't want to use too much, you don't want to use too little. So here it is, I'm just making sure the bearings are in place. And before I put it down, I keep looking at the bearing, make sure there's the inner race on the outer block half. You want to make sure that's in place, that snaps in too. They usually stay in anyway. Now I'm just double checking everything, that the O-ring didn't slip, that it's got to fit in the groove on the top. And also I'm making sure there's the last check on that middle bearings, make sure they didn't fall off. And that's it, it just goes right in. Then you just look at it around the perimeter, make sure it's down flush, then you put your bolts in it, your 5/16 bolts, and you just torque them from inside out, then you put your 4/4 20s, 8 foot-pounds, 7 foot-pounds, and the 5/16 I think are 12 foot-pounds. And then you just keep putting the motor together from there, and that's pretty much it. Pretty simple. It's all labor. I always say that. You gotta like it, and it's just a lot of labor.
So I got everything torqued up. 11, 12 pounds on the 5/16 bolts, 7 or 8 on the 1/4 20s. But before you do tighten the bolts up, make sure you put the 2 pins in first. I forgot to mention that. The guide pins that kind of centers everything in the proper location before you torque everything. And also there's a pilot ring that you can pop in. You can put it in after it's torqued. I've done it both ways, but I would recommend tapping it in before you torque it in. And there's a notch that goes in the back here, goes towards the back of the motor. Not that it really matters. Until this day, I do not know what that bearing does, but anyway, I put it in there. Also, the top 2 bolts have the mount goes on first, and the top 2 crankcase bolts go in. And you torque it all up, and that's it. Then you continue putting it together. Next, I'm going to put the cylinder head on it. But it spins nice. So it should be okay. We'll see what happens. Maybe it'll run. Should. So here I want to show you the cylinders before I put the head back on. They cleaned up really nice. Again, with the light honing, no corrosion at all. She spins nice. So I'm going to put the head on now. I'm going to use the old head gasket. I'm just going to clean the brass, the copper part of it, or the brass, and torque it up and see, and see what happens after that. Just keep going on this thing. Now it's the fun part, putting it back together. All right, here we go. Here I got the cylinder head gasket cleaned up. Basically a wire brush on the outside lightly, and some fine steel wool on the metal inserts. And then I'll put the cylinder head on. I mean, I put a new head gasket on it. You know, I'm going to monitor it for a while. I'll run it, make sure no water's getting in the cylinders. But if the head gaskets weren't $40 a piece, you know, in that neighborhood, I would put a new one on if they were $10 or $15. But like everything else, it's through the roof. And the old head gaskets were very durable. You could use them 4 or 5 times, from my experience, without wasting your money. So I'm going to put the head on and take it from there. Now I torque the head 120 inch-pounds in, then work myself out. Pretty much that's how you do all cylinder heads. It's about 10 foot-pounds, 120 inch-pounds.